In the heart of Northeast Asia, where three countries meet at a narrow river crossing, a decades-old dream is finally awakening. This past June, when Russia's leader arrived in North Korea for a historic state visit, the world's attention focused on their signing of the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. But hidden within that diplomatic ceremony was something far more consequential, a quiet agreement that could reshape the economic and military landscape of an entire region. The project in question? The Tumen River outlet, and the players? China, Russia, and North Korea, three nations that have spent 30 years navigating the complex geopolitics surrounding this strategic waterway. What makes this development so significant that Japan has sounded alarm bells? Why would a seemingly modest river project provoke warnings of a threat to regional security? And what does this mean for the balance of power in the Pacific? If you're interested in understanding how global economics and geopolitics intersect, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dive analyses of the forces shaping our world. Let's dive in. Russia's pivot east, the Far East strategy, Reborn. To understand why the Tumen River matters now, we need to rewind to February 2022. When Russia launched its military operation in Ukraine, the Western response was swift and devastating. Sanctions unprecedented in their scope crashed down on the Russian economy like a tidal wave. Energy exports were targeted, financial systems were cut off, technology transfers were blocked. Russia found itself increasingly isolated from the markets that had sustained its economy for decades. But isolation breeds innovation, or at least adaptation. In response, Moscow dusted off and reinvigorated what they call the Far East strategy, presenting it at the 8th Eastern Economic Forum. This isn't some new improvisation. The Far East strategy represents Russia's most ambitious development blueprint for the 21st century, a comprehensive plan to transform its eastern territories from remote backwaters into thriving economic zones. The strategy's objectives are clear: attract foreign investment from Asian partners, diversify the economy beyond resource extraction, upgrade crumbling Soviet-era infrastructure, and establish new maritime gateways to global markets. The plan encompasses special economic zones, free port designations, infrastructure megaprojects, and the construction of modern harbor facilities. And at the center of this reimagined eastern future sits the Tumen River, a waterway that most people outside the region have never heard of, but which could become one of the most strategically important corridors in Asia. Three countries, one river. The geography of complexity. The Tumen River winds through Northeast Asia for 520 kilometers, draining a basin that covers 33,200 square kilometers. For most of its length, about 510 kilometers, it forms the natural border between China and North Korea. Then, in its final stretch, something interesting happens. The river curves through just 15 kilometers of Russian territory in the Primorsky Krai region before finally emptying into the Sea of Japan at the Russian-North Korean border. This geography is everything. China's three northeastern provinces, Jilin, Liaoning, and Heilongjiang, are tantalizingly close to the sea, yet have no direct access to it. Russia controls vast Pacific coastlines, but struggles to develop its sparsely populated eastern territories. North Korea possesses strategic coastal territory, but lacks the resources and international partnerships to develop it. The Tumen River represents a potential solution to all three challenges simultaneously. The strategic relationship among these three nations extends far beyond simple geographic proximity. They share intertwined histories, overlapping security interests, and increasingly convergent views on the global order. Western observers have long watched their cooperation with a mixture of concern and fascination. But for decades, this cooperation remained more theoretical than practical when it came to the Tumen River. Why? Because turning theory into reality requires navigating one of the most sensitive geopolitical puzzles in Asia, A dream deferred, the Eurasian Continental Bridge that never was. The vision for the Tumen River region isn't new. Back in the 1980s, the United Nations Development Program proposed something extraordinary, a $30 billion, 20-year initiative to create an international logistics and financial hub at the river's mouth. They called it part of the Eurasian Continental Bridge concept, an ambitious plan to connect the economic powerhouses of Asia with European markets through streamlined transportation corridors. Imagine it, a thriving port city where the borders of three nations meet, a crossroads where goods from across Asia could be consolidated and shipped to markets worldwide, a special economic zone attracting investment from around the globe. It was a beautiful vision on paper. In reality, it went nowhere. The problem wasn't technical, though we'll get to those challenges in a moment. The problem was political. The Tumen River doesn't belong to any single country. Its waters flow through a geopolitical minefield. Under the Treaty of Aigan, signed in the 19th century between China and Russia, navigation rights and sea access were divided between these two powers. This meant China couldn't simply decide to develop the waterway unilaterally. Any major project would require Russian approval and cooperation. Then there's North Korea, which controls the southern bank. Pyongyang insisted on what they called approval and participation rights, essentially a veto over any development that might affect their interests. Three countries, three different political systems, three sets of national interests, and one river that could only be developed if all three agreed. For 30 years, that agreement remained elusive. The turning point, from theory to agreement. But something changed in 2014. At the Conference on Interaction and Confidence-Building Measures in Asia, held in Shanghai, China, and Russia, reached what officials described as a substantive agreement on Tumen River cooperation. Progress seemed imminent. Plans were drawn up. Feasibility studies were commissioned. Investment proposals circulated. And then Japan intervened. Tokyo's opposition was fierce and unambiguous. Japanese officials made clear that if China and Russia proceeded with the Tumen River project, they would face coordinated sanctions from both Japan and the United States. The message was simple: abandon this plan or face economic consequences. Faced with this pressure, and with the technical challenges we'll explore shortly, the project stalled once again. The Tumen River remained undeveloped, its potential unrealized. But geopolitics never stands still. The world that existed in 2014 is not the world we live in today. 2024. The year everything changed. Fast forward to May 2024. The Russian president arrived in China for a state visit. Among the many topics discussed during those meetings was one that had been dormant for years: navigation rights at the Tumen River outlet where Chinese, Russian, and North Korean borders converge. The joint statement issued after those talks contained carefully worded language that, to trained observers, signaled something significant had shifted. Both sides acknowledged reaching certain agreements on the matter. Then came June. When Russia's leader visited Pyongyang, the Treaty on Comprehensive Strategic Partnership was signed with considerable fanfare. But buried within that broader agreement was a specific, highly technical provision, an agreement between the Russian and North Korean governments on constructing a cross-border highway bridge across the Tumen River. These weren't just diplomatic pleasantries, these were concrete, actionable commitments. The plan that has now emerged is ambitious: open the 15-kilometer coastal zone where the river meets the sea, creating a shared port development area that all three nations can utilize. Redesign the highway bridge to serve as a transportation hub connecting all three countries. And here's the key technical detail: demolish the existing railway bridge that has long blocked larger vessels from navigating the river, replacing it with a new highway bridge designed specifically to allow ship passage underneath. After 30 years of false starts and political obstacles, the Tumen River project is finally moving forward. The technical challenges: Why this isn't simple. Before we explore the strategic implications, we need to understand why this project has been so difficult to implement. The obstacles aren't just political, they're formidable engineering challenges that have deterred development for decades. Challenge number 1, the lack of natural harbor. The Tumen River's mouth doesn't offer the kind of natural deep water harbor that makes port construction straightforward. Building a port here essentially means creating a harbor from scratch on flat coastal terrain. That requires massive investment. We're talking billions of dollars. And cutting-edge engineering. You're not just building docks, you're fundamentally reshaping the coastline. Challenge number 2. Siltation. Over decades and centuries, sediment has accumulated in the river channel. This buildup has gradually choked the waterway, making it impossible for large cargo vessels to navigate. The water depth at the river's mouth measures just 3.5 meters. Modern cargo ships require a minimum of 10 meters to operate safely. Dredging this much material isn't just expensive. It's an ongoing maintenance challenge that would need to be managed perpetually. Challenge number 3, the existing railway bridge. This Soviet-era structure spans about 530 meters across the river. The clearance between the bridge's bottom and the water surface is less than 10 meters. That might sound like a reasonable height, but it effectively prevents any large ocean-going vessel from passing beneath it. As long as that bridge stands in its current form, the Tumen River cannot function as a major shipping corridor. These technical hurdles help explain why, despite the obvious strategic value, the Tumen River has remained undeveloped for so long. The costs are enormous. The engineering is complex. The maintenance requirements are perpetual. But when the strategic benefits are sufficiently compelling, even the most daunting technical challenges become surmountable. To understand why China is invested in this project, we need to go back in time, way back to the 19th century. Before the Qing dynasty's decline, the Tumen River estuary was under Chinese control. This gave northeastern China direct access to the Pacific Ocean through the Sea of Japan. But during the so-called century of humiliation, when foreign powers carved up Chinese territory, Tsarist Russia occupied this coastal region. In a single stroke, China's northeast lost its only maritime gateway. The implications of that loss have reverberated for more than a century. The 3 northeastern provinces, Jilin, Liaoning, and Heilongjiang, became effectively landlocked from a practical standpoint. Yes, Liaoning has coastline along the Bohai Sea, but accessing international markets through the Sea of Japan remained impossible without passing through foreign waters or using foreign ports. This geographic constraint has profound economic consequences. If businesses in Jilin want to export goods to markets in Japan, South Korea, or Southeast Asia, they face either lengthy overland transportation to distant Chinese ports or expensive arrangements using foreign logistics networks. Either way, costs multiply and competitiveness suffers. The Tumen River outlet would change this calculation entirely. Reopening this gateway would provide northeastern China with direct access not just to the Sea of Japan, but through it to the entire Pacific Rim. Goods could be shipped to Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, the Americas, and beyond, all without the transportation markups that currently plague the region. Transit times would plummet, logistics costs would drop, the economic competitiveness of China's northeastern industrial base would be transformed. But the benefits extend beyond economics. Here's what makes regional security analysts nervous. The Tumen River outlet doesn't just offer economic advantages. It provides potential military capabilities that don't currently exist. Currently, China's naval presence in the region is focused on the Yellow Sea and East China Sea, accessed through ports in Liaoning and Shandong. But a developed Tumen River outlet would enable something new, the establishment of a naval facility in China's far northeast, with direct access to the Sea of Japan. Think about the strategic implications. A northern fleet based near the Tumen River could enter the Sea of Japan at will. That body of water, currently dominated by Japanese and American naval forces, would suddenly have a new major player. Such a fleet would represent a direct counterbalance to military installations in Japan and South Korea. But the strategic reach extends even further. From the Sea of Japan, naval vessels can access the Pacific Ocean through the straits between Japan's islands. From there, routes open to the broader Pacific, potentially even approaching Alaska, what strategists sometimes refer to as the third island chain in Pacific defense planning. This isn't about aggressive intentions, it's about strategic options. In the world of geopolitical chess, having the option to project power is often as important as actually doing so. The Tumen River outlet would give China options it simply doesn't have today. And this is precisely what concerns Japan so deeply. For Russia, the stakes are different but equally compelling. Western sanctions have targeted Russia's ability to export energy and other commodities through traditional European and American markets. Alternative routes through the Baltic and Black Seas face NATO scrutiny and potential restrictions. Russia needs new maritime corridors that bypass Western control entirely. The Tumen River represents exactly that. A gateway to Asian markets that doesn't pass through choke points controlled by adversarial powers. But Russia's vision extends beyond simply having another port. They're thinking about connectivity on a grander scale. In the future, the Tumen River outlet could link up with another of Russia's strategic priorities, the Arctic Maritime Passage. As climate change opens new shipping routes through the Arctic Ocean, Russia is positioning itself to control the Northern Sea route connecting Asia, Europe, and North America. This route would be dramatically shorter than traditional paths through the Suez or Panama canals. Combined with the Tumen River outlet, Russia could offer shippers a comprehensive alternative transportation network that avoids Western-controlled waters entirely. For Moscow, this isn't just about the Far East. It's about creating economic resilience that sanctions cannot touch. It's about attracting investment from Asian partners who see value in these alternative corridors. It's about transforming the Russian Far East from a demographic and economic liability into a strategic asset. The economic revitalization of this region would also serve domestic political goals. The Russian Far East has suffered from population decline, capital flight, and economic stagnation for decades. A thriving Tumen River port complex, connected to Chinese and North Korean transportation networks, could help reverse those trends. For North Korea, the Tumen River project offers something perhaps most precious of all economic oxygen. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, North Korea's economy has been trapped in a downward spiral. The socialist planned economy that once provided basic stability crumbled without Soviet support. State-owned enterprises became inefficient shells. Official wages became nearly meaningless as inflation spiraled, and people's daily lives became a struggle for survival. In response, North Koreans developed informal and semi-legal markets, what economists call a parallel economy. These markets operate in a gray zone, tolerated by authorities because they prevent complete economic collapse, but never officially sanctioned or supported. The result is an economy that limps along, but never really recovers. International sanctions prevent foreign investment. Isolation prevents technology transfer. Lack of infrastructure prevents even the limited trade that regulations allow. The Tumen River project could begin to change this equation. A functioning port at the river's mouth would give North Korea direct access to international shipping lanes without depending entirely on Chinese or Russian intermediaries. It would create opportunities for legitimate trade that current sanctions might allow, particularly trade with China and Russia, neither of which fully enforce Western sanctions. More importantly, it would make North Korea a necessary participant in a strategic economic corridor connecting three countries. That participation brings leverage, investment, technical expertise, and economic diversification that North Korea desperately needs. Now, this doesn't mean North Korea will suddenly transform into an economic tiger, but it does mean they gain a stake in regional economic integration that provides benefits even under continued sanctions. Which brings us to the question that hangs over this entire project. Why is Japan so adamantly opposed? The official Japanese position focuses on security concerns, and those concerns are not unreasonable from Tokyo's perspective. Japan views the Sea of Japan as a strategic buffer zone that has historically provided a measure of security. It's the body of water separating the Japanese archipelago from mainland Asia. Throughout the Cold War and into the present era, Japan has benefited from the fact that potential adversaries had limited access to these waters. Chinese naval forces currently access the Sea of Japan primarily by sailing around the Korean peninsula or through the straits between Japanese islands, routes that Japan can monitor. Russian naval forces operate from Vladivostok, but Russia's Pacific Fleet has been in decline for decades and doesn't represent the threat it once did. North Korean vessels are limited in capability and range. The Tumen River project changes this equation fundamentally. It would give China direct, unmonitored access to the Sea of Japan through a port that Japan has no visibility into. Russian naval capabilities in the region would be reinforced by new port facilities. Even North Korea would gain enhanced maritime access. From Tokyo's perspective, this looks like strategic encirclement. Waters they've long considered relatively secure would suddenly host an expanded presence from three countries with whom Japan has varying degrees of tension. But there's another layer to Japan's concern, one that's more economic than military. The Tumen River project also represents economic competition that could diminish Japan's role in regional trade networks. Currently, Japanese ports serve as major transshipment hubs for goods moving between Asia, Europe, and the Americas. Japanese logistics companies facilitate much of the region's trade. This role generates significant revenue and employment while giving Japan considerable influence over regional economic flows. A developed Tumen River port complex, connected to Chinese, Russian, and North Korean transportation networks, would create an alternative hub that could siphon away some of this business. Chinese exporters in the Northeast might choose to ship through the Tumen River rather than sending goods to Shanghai or using Japanese ports. Russian exports could flow through this corridor rather than through the Suez Canal. The impact on individual Japanese ports or companies might be modest, but the strategic implication is clear. Japan would face new competition in a sector where it currently enjoys advantages. There's also the political dimension. Closer economic integration among China, Russia, and North Korea inevitably means stronger political coordination. These three countries would form an economic bloc in Northeast Asia that operates independently of, and potentially in opposition to, the US-Japan-South Korea alliance structure. For Japan, which depends on American security guarantees and close coordination with Washington, this represents a fundamental shift in regional power dynamics. So the critical question becomes, can Japan or the United States actually stop this project? The honest answer is probably not, at least not entirely. In 2014, when Japan issued warnings about sanctions, Russia still maintained significant economic ties with the West. China was deeply integrated into global supply chains and concerned about Western market access. The threat of coordinated sanctions carried real weight. The situation today is fundamentally different. Russia is already under the most comprehensive Western sanctions regime ever implemented against a major economy. There's simply not much more the West can do to increase economic pressure. Moscow has learned to operate within these constraints, finding alternative partners and developing sanction-resistant systems. China's relationship with the West has also shifted. While still economically interdependent, the strategic competition is now openly acknowledged. Beijing is less vulnerable to Western economic pressure than it was a decade ago, and more willing to accept some economic costs for strategic gains. North Korea has operated under heavy sanctions for so long that additional measures would make little difference to their calculations. This means the primary tool Japan used in 2014, the threat of economic sanctions, has lost much of its effectiveness. That said, the project still faces significant challenges, just not primarily from external opposition. The genuine barriers to the Tumen River project aren't diplomatic, they're practical. The infrastructure simply doesn't exist yet. The port facilities need to be built from scratch. The river channel requires extensive dredging. The railway bridge must be demolished and replaced. Roads and rail lines connecting to the port need to be upgraded or constructed. Power systems, communications networks, customs facilities, all of this infrastructure must be built in a region that's currently relatively undeveloped. The financial investment will be enormous. While the three countries have agreed in principle to move forward, the actual funding commitments have not been publicly detailed. Who pays for what? How are costs divided? What's the timeline for different phases of construction? These practical questions remain to be worked out. The coordination challenge is substantial. Three countries with different political systems, economic models, and bureaucratic cultures need to harmonize their planning and implementation. Anyone who has worked on international projects knows how complicated this becomes. Different regulations, different technical standards, different decision-making processes. The maintenance requirements are perpetual.